after the other, innumerable great such sages, spiritual technologists, who made this the focus of their study, experiment, and practice. And they came out with such tremendous realizations that are very powerful tools for all of us for achieving that fulfillment, satisfaction, and happiness that we all seek, but we cannot get merely through physical sciences. So, what is that inner technology? That is what we would like to understand. This inner world has got various segments. To keep the discussion simple, there is the mind and there is the intellect. By the mind, I do not mean the brain. The brain is the hardware. However, the mind is something subtle. Science is probing in to understand the distinction between the brain and the mind. The picture yet is not very clear. These spiritual scientists, the inner technologists, tell us that the mind is a subtle machine inside us that is constantly generating thoughts, creating desires. And the intellect is the faculty of discrimination that's fitted into the system. So the intellect makes decisions and the mind creates desires. In this system, the intellect has the ability to control the mind. Although it does not seem so, you often feel that my mind is not under control. You do tend to feel this because you wish to focus it somewhere and the mind is running elsewhere. However, that is not so. All of us have this ability that if our intellect could firmly decide, the mind would immediately come under focus. Like, for example, do people like working in their office? Very rarely. Most people do it because they have to. That is why Friday evening is one of the best times of the week. There's a feeling of euphoria and liberation. Weekend is coming. And Monday morning is a time for depression. I asked somebody in America on Monday morning, how are you? He said, what? How are you, Swamiji? Today is Monday morning. In other words, people do not like to work. And yet, everybody sits there in their office and applies themselves to their work for the duration of the working hours from 8 to 5 or whatever it is. How did that mind come under control? Because the intellect decided this is necessary. If I do not do it, I will lose my job. And in these days of recession, there are not many alternative jobs in the market. So if you want to feed yourself and the family, you better do this. When the intellect decided the absolute necessity of it, the mind came under focus. You are doing this throughout the day. Your mind says, at 8 o'clock, in the night, I would like to see that TV serial that's coming. The intellect says, tomorrow is your final exam, you better sit and study. So the intellect controls the mind and you sit and study. The fact that you have made it, the students, to the MIT is an indication of the extent to which you have exercised the power of the intellect over the mind, to dedicate yourself to your studies and excel in them. But the fact is, every student does this. Parents come to me, Swamiji, please explain something to my child. He doesn't apply his mind to studies. He keeps playing all day long. He's your child. Why don't you explain to him? He doesn't listen to me. All right, my son, why don't you focus on your studies? Swamiji, I don't like it. Mine doesn't remain there. That is the nature of his mind. And the same student, when he sits in the examination hall to answer the question paper, for 3 hours he brings his mind into complete focus. He doesn't even look at the neighbors or peep out of the window. After 3 hours, the examiner has to pull the paper away. It's time up, please give it. Look at the amount of concentration that the student developed. How did this happen when his mind was so unfocused? That was the power of the intellect. The discrimination of the intellect realized that these 3 hours are of vital importance. Now, Mr. Mind, if you fool around, it will not work. You will have to repeat the year. So when the intellect decided this is important, the mind came into focus. That kind of focus, if he had maintained throughout the year, he or she would have topped the school. But throughout the year, the intellect said, studies is important, but not for me, for my parents. For me, football is more important. When the decision of the intellect was otherwise, there was no question of controlling the mind. So you see the power that the intellect holds over the mind. Now that power is not being utilized in our daily lives. To utilize that power, we need a little bit of knowledge and then implementation. So what is this knowledge that we will be discussing further? The mind that we wish to control and direct and channelize to attain our ultimate goal, this mind keeps on creating a number of desires. Some of these desires are beneficial for us. Some of these are detrimental to us. Some of them elevate us. Some of them degrade us. We all experience there are varieties of desires that are being thrown up by the mind. And it is in our best interest to reduce the lower desires and enhance the upper desires. The Vedic scriptures, these textbooks for the inner technology, they divided these desires into 3 categories. In fact, the material energy, they divided it into three categories. Now, when I say material energy, they say that not only is this the material energy, the inner world is also created by the material energy. So that has three categories: the mode of goodness or sattva gun, the mode of passion or rajogun, and the mode of ignorance or tamogun. So when the mode of ignorance dominates a person's personality, that person experiences the desire for violence, anger, intoxication, laziness, sleep, indolence. These are the general traits of the mode of ignorance. When the mode of passion predominates in a person's personality, it leads to intense desires for the objects of the senses, intense ambition for worldly enhancement, for prestige, for attainment of worldly objects. When the mode of goodness predominates, that leads to peace of mind, the desire to cultivate knowledge, the desire for compassion, for service. All these are symptoms of the mode of goodness. So we all have our natural disposition of our mind as it is characterized by these three modes. And we would like to eliminate the lower desires and to enhance or develop the higher desires. I mean, if you were given a choice, you would rather have a burning passion for knowledge than an incurable urge for ice creams. Because it would lead to the problem of obesity and then cholesterol and so many other things. So these desires get us into trouble and we wish to reduce them. And there are desires we would like to befriend. Desires that elevate our life, that raise it to sublime heights. But how to do this is a constant struggle.